Okay, hello everyone. I think we'll just give people a few seconds to join because we're not actually at 3 o'clock yet. Give us another few seconds. Okay, let's get started. Wanted to talk to you today about our experiences in deploying bulk payments, specifically in the Myanmar context with the MMD project. Bulk payments, I think, is a very important part of any payment service. It's often done well, it's often done badly, but the point is the end users, the customers, be they the payers or the payees, really value it, and it has some interesting and challenging use cases. So I just wanted to talk about some of our learnings. So in Myanmar, we're using the bulk payments interface really for social payments. So it's all about COVID payments, payments for other social reasons. It might be pension payments, or it might be salary payments from a large employer or even a government department, or most likely things like food payments for people who are struggling, etc. It's an extremely important use case, and we have an opportunity in Myanmar to do it well and to reach all those people who don't have mobile wallets, for example, or bank accounts, because we can send money directly to MFIs. And we reckon that, well, some information from UNCDF was that around 75% of the potential beneficiaries of this kind of payment don't have even a mobile wallet, but they do have an MFI account. So that's our opportunity to help those people. So the bulk payment solution that we are deploying, because it's part of the Majorloop Hub, is interoperable across all connected DFSPs. It doesn't particularly matter whether you have only an MFI account or whether you have a mobile wallet or even a bank account. We can, if you're connected to a hub, if your account provider is connected to the hub, then we can get the money to you. This does also require some enhancements to the Oracle, which I think that James Bush might be talking about later across this convening. It's important that we support existing business processes. The people who send money in these contexts have very established processes, and they've built up those processes over a considerable number of years of trial and error and what works in reaching people with these payments. We need to change those processes to some degree, obviously, because we want them to actually do it through MMD rather than anything, for example, cash-based. But they have established those practices, a lot of those practices, through hard-earned experience, and us coming along and saying, no, that's not how you do it, you must do it like this instead, is not going to work. One thing I would say is that we are focusing on the distribution piece. We're not intruding or reaching into the NGO space. We're not helping them compile lists of beneficiaries. We're not helping them to assess the eligibility of registered beneficiaries. We're just taking the payments list and distributing them. So everything I just referred to is essentially what I'd call a beneficiary management system. And it would be good if we were able to offer that that service as well for the smaller NGOs, but that's well down the line, way further down the roadmap. But obviously things like OpenG2P are things that we're looking at. So moving on to the actual experience of deploying it. I must caution, we've only just begun the deployment. We've done the initial high-level design, and we're currently looking for really completing the implementation over the next couple of months at most. We've encountered some significant issues. in using the bulk payments interface of the Motioloop Hub. First of all, the bulk payment API, as it's currently implemented, is not sufficiently generic. It takes a single bulk payment list, a list of payments to be made to customers of a particular DFSP, routes that bulk payment list to the DFSP and actions it there. We need more than that. The other problem that we've encountered is actually at the far end, where the majority, in fact, I think all of the DFSPs we've tried to integrate with as recipients of payments. Leslie Ann, you might want to mute yourself. They can't accept a bulk payment list because their core banking systems are not flexible enough. They can only accept single payments. So the fundamental assumption that we could just drop a bulk payment list on a particular DFSP turns out not to be correct, particularly for the MFIs we're dealing with. They need single transfers. So we had to come up with alternatives. We assessed multiple options here. So for example, we could extend the implementation of the API on the Motioloop Hub to allow the hub to handle mixed bulk payments list, but that puts a significant processing load on the hub to take a mixed list and then direct it as separate lists to individual DFSPs. Alternatively, we could require the bank, this is the bank, I assume it's a bank, this has taken the payments list from the NGO to actually break up that list themselves, to sort it and create individual lists and submit them one at a time. That's not impossible, but in the context of what we're trying to do in Myanmar, it's unlikely that we're going to find anyone who's willing to do that. They, like everyone else, is looking for minimum effort. On the recipient side, the beneficiary side, we're looking at two options there. We could, again, modify the implementation of the API at the hub to perform a series of single transfers to the DFSP, so breaking up that list into single transactions. Or we could require the connected DFSP to implement bulk payment transfers at the CBS. And of all these options, that is probably the least likely. There are very few MFIs who are equipped to actually extend their core banking system. So I think we can just reject that out of hand. In fact, we decided we had a third option. One of the characteristics of the MMD deployment of the Motioloop Hub is that we made a decision early on that all DFSPs, be they mobile wallets, banks, or MFIs, if they want to connect to the Motioloop Hub, then we're going to use Payment Manager. And the reason for that is it just makes the integration so much easier. We can cut it down from several months elapsed time down to a couple of weeks elapsed time to connect a DFSP, which is important when you look at the scale, the number of MFIs we're trying to connect in Myanmar. So given that we are using Payment Manager at each end, why don't we instead look to extend Payment Manager to support the bulk payments interface and actually overcome some of the shortcomings we've identified? So in any bulk payment transaction, we're looking at two instances of Payment Manager, one on the payer side and one on the beneficiary side. So on the payer side, when Payment Manager receives a bulk transfer request, it can take a single bulk payment list and orchestrate multiple per DFSP bulk payments with the hub. So that load is then put on Payment Manager at the DFSP side, and the load is taken off the hub. On the beneficiary side, we can take a bulk payment transfer from the hub and orchestrate a series of single transfers to the DFSP CBS. So again, all the risk is taken off the CBS. So what's the advantages? Well, we think there are three advantages of doing it this way. First of all, we can do bulk payments with the existing implementation of the Mojo switch. We don't have to wait for enhancements to it. We know that there are there's a future version with bulk payment enhancements coming along, but we don't have to wait for that. We move bulk payment processing to the DFSPs rather than stressing the hub. And finally, it places no specific requirements on the connecting DFSPs. If they have a standard connection through Payment Manager into the Mojo hub, then they don't need to change anything else. Sam, at this point, I think it might be useful if you could say a few words about the roadmap for the bulk quote service.
Thank you, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so thanks for stressing on these advantages of the chosen approach. Those of our colleagues and community members who are on the reference architecture stream know this very well, that as part of dealing with the bulk scenarios. So initially we thought it will have its own bounded context, but then later on we thought we'll leverage the existing individual processing frameworks or infrastructure, for example, individual codes, individual transfers, and then apply bulk on that, on top of that. So as part of that, Paul, how much time do you have?
I've got plenty of time, don't worry.
Okay, so as part of that, then we went into exploration where we wanted to see where we wanted to handle this bulk processing. As you know, previously in one of the slides in the appendix, I think we can see where Paul touched on the current bulk approach, where the onus is on the financial service providers to do the processing. And we brainstormed a little bit on the reference architecture stream, and we thought we'll talk to various subject matter experts like Francis One and others from MyForce and DPC and Paul and some of the product people on the Payment Manager. Then they thought that it can be a good marketplace-based approach where we can leverage the existing switch implementation, the version 1.0 of Mojo Core, and also relieve or alleviate the pain on the MFIs or financial service providers by letting them use their framework as is by applying this approach in the Payment Manager. I think it's very good, at least from my perspective, thankful that they volunteered to take that up, because if we want this to be implemented on the switch as part of reference architecture, I don't think it's going to be available for a few months at least, to say the least. So this way, it's a win-win in that the core banking solutions, they themselves don't need to make any changes. And the switch, as it works right now, also supports this approach. One extension I think we want to have in the roadmap is that even in this approach, Paul, I think you'll go into detail later on.
Yes.
But account lookup still needs individual calls from the Payment Manager or the FSP side to look up the payee DFSPs or the beneficial DFSPs. So that still needs to happen. But one item we wanted to have on the reference architecture workstream is that we wanted to apply and provide for a bulk lookup resource. So that is in the works. Hopefully that will alleviate some burden from Payment Manager implementation. But the codes and transfer side of things should work as is if this is adopted as a standard approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. That's precisely the input I needed at this point. Thanks, that's great. I'm going to walk you through now some of the thinking of how this will work as a high-level schematic. I apologize if some of you are looking on small screens. I've done my best to make this bigger, but it's only going to get worse from here on in, so bear with me. If you look on this slide down at the bottom, you can see there is here the, oops, sorry, must remember not to click. There's the payer. So I've put here government, but it is more likely to be some form of NGO. People we have in mind are World Food Programme, Save the Children, similar organizations. They need to register potential beneficiaries. But one of the key things that they need to do is to update the registry. We have an Oracle, which we're using in Myanmar for an alias Oracle, which we're using for to distribute its loan repayments, loan disbursements, but also for this purpose. And we want to be able to register an alias and the account details against which that person is receiving payments. So there is a need for an integration there at the API level to register beneficiaries. And there's a whole load of thinking behind that about the benefits for MFIs and others in terms of keeping their records up to date by as many touch points as possible with the ultimate beneficiaries. So from that, an NGO has to build a bulk payments list. They define the characteristics that somebody must reach in order to be eligible for payments. So the registration data includes a lot of stuff around the demographics, where they live, how big their family is, how many children, what work activities they indulge, they engage in, etc. Whether their children attend school, and all of these can be used to build a characteristic of what a beneficiary looks like. They then can, from that, apply that to the list of beneficiaries, and out from that comes a list of matching beneficiaries and the amounts that they should be paid. These are all functions of a beneficiary management system. They then submit that payments list, the aggregated list, to their funds holding DFSP, so a bank where the money is going to come from. The payer DFSP then accepts that list, checks that the NGO has got enough money to make this disbursement, and submits a bulk quote request. But it's trapped by Payment Manager. Payment Manager finds which DFSP hosts each beneficiary through a lookup against the registry, the Oracle, and creates a series of separate lists. It then gets a bulk quote from each DFSP and builds an overall bulk quote. Also, for completeness of information, it gathers the full name that the beneficiary DFSP has for that individual and adds that to the list so that the NGO can verify who it is. The payer DFSP forwards the notification back to the NGO. The NGO looks through the list, decides whether the names are right, checks them against their own list, and once they're happy, says, okay, go. The payer DFSP initiates the transfers. Payment Manager then posts bulk transfers for each DFSP in turn in a loop. The MojaLoop hub routes each bulk transfer request to each DFSP. The beneficiary DFSP Payment Manager catches that list and breaks it down into a series of single transfers and does each in turn. The beneficiary DFSP themselves then return the transfer response and at the same time notifies the beneficiary's app, if they have such a thing, and the beneficiary themselves gets the payment notification. At the same time, Payment Manager at the beneficiary's DFSP is building an aggregated bulk transfer response for this DFSP. The aggregated bulk transfer response is returned via the MojaLoop hub back to Payment Manager at the payer organization, which builds a complete aggregated bulk transfer response across all beneficiary DFSPs. This is then returned to the payer DFSP and back to the NGO for verification. Simple, I think. This is the just a zoom in on the element about building separate lists, which I've already been through to some degree. I won't go through that again. And secondly, this is the individual transfers at each pay DFSP. You will have spotted that there are a lot of assumptions those diagrams. A lot of simplifications. So I will briefly show you the more complex version, which shows the full process flow. Here, you can see the gray boxes that are on here. They are essentially looped activities. Pretty much as you'd expect, I think. There's a loop here per beneficiary on the payments list. There's a loop here per beneficiary DFSP. There's one per beneficiary on each list for the bulk quote request, and secondly here for the actual payment. I can zoom in a little more on that. So for example, this is the element of building each list. So the payment manager is required to look up each individual beneficiary in turn from the payments list, submit that to the hub. The hub forwards the request to the beneficiary DFSP payment manager. Payment manager coordinates with the DFSP to get sorry, getting ahead of myself. It's of course the Oracle, which returns with the DFSP back through. It's the normal get parties response. From that, the payment manager builds a set of payment files, one per DFSP. Getting the quotes is a similar process, where again, payment manager simply loops through, going to each DFSP and coordinating it across the merge loop switch to build the aggregated quotes. Essentially, it's a loop of bulk quote requests and responses, which are all aggregated together. And finally, transferring the funds one at a time. I think that's, I hope that's clear enough. I know it's not very easy following these diagrams, and I do apologize. Moving on, there are questions around digital identity with regard to this. Questions of identity come up repeatedly. I mean, I've already referred to the aliases and the alias problem. People do very often want to have some easy form of identity so that they can route payments themselves. If we look at the history of bulk payments in countries such as Nigeria, we can see that bulk payments has only really succeeded very well when it has been linked into some form of digital identity. So you can very easily deduplicate and check that you're sending the funds to the right place. So we are exploring how we can link with emerging digital identity initiatives. We're very interested in some of the initiatives in this area, and of course national digital identity initiatives, if we can link to them. As I've mentioned, the successful social payments, salary payments are facilitated through a link to digital identity. You're driving down on ghost beneficiaries, people who have died or have moved away or whatever it might be. But at the same time, it also helps make sure that I, the beneficiary, actually get the payments. So we can drive down on misrouting or fraud or people collecting funds on behalf of the beneficiary when they were not authorized to do so. And we think that the merge loop ALS Oracle combination is integral to what we call a pay me approach. So I really, as a beneficiary, I don't want you to pay my MFI account. I don't want you to pay my bank account, my mobile wallet. I want you to pay me. Which account I'm currently using and how often I change it is really not the NGO's business. It's not the government's business. It's no one's business but mine. I will use the account which is most suitable for me. But the way to make that work and make it work transparently is through adaptive use of the ALS Oracle and the development of pay me services. So what's next? We've been through a detailed planning session. We have everything in the next few sprints to actually implement this. It seems to be going pretty well at the moment. It is a lot of work to extend Payment Manager to support this. We're also working with UNCDF. We need NGO partners to pilot on this. There are, I think, around 20 different NGOs within Myanmar who are doing this kind of payment, of which 8 are large and probably ones we'd want to, large and experienced in this area, and probably ones we'd want to partner with. We've talked to, or UNCDF have talked to a number who have expressed interest, but they want support around integration, and they also want clarity on how to get the funds to the people who are definitely their beneficiaries. So we need some clarity on that. And in particular, we do need help. We need help to support, be it DFSPs, be they banks or whoever it may be, on how to integrate with NGO social payment systems. We know that the NGOs have a number of social payment systems, beneficiary management systems. People like World Food Programme have well-established systems that they've used for a number of years. We need to integrate with them. It's not just WFP that uses that, other NGOs use the same platform. So there's only a few, but we need help to actually encourage banks or mobile wallets to integrate with those platforms. We'd love to integrate with a beneficiary management system, in particular OpenG2P. That would potentially solve a lot of problems here and actually enable us to scale with this really quite quickly. And as I've mentioned, I'd love to be integrating this with a digital identity solution. And obviously there are candidates out there, but also we have to recognize that per country deployments are going to be reliant on national digital identity systems where they exist, and in particular on national registries, civil registrations services, which is a whole specialist area that we are not in a place to exploit at this moment. So I think that is probably the bulk of what I wanted to say, if you excuse the pun. Sam, have you got anything to add to that, or should we just open it to questions?
Thanks, Paul. I think you covered it. We can open it to Q&A. Michael has, I think, a first question that he posted on the Pathable platform. Michael, I've enabled the audio. Maybe you can share that, or do you want me to read it out?
I think you can moderate.
Sorry, yes, I was just wondering about how the signatures and the conditions and fulfillments would work in this context.
For that area, Michael, I would have an interesting whiteboard and workshop session with Michael, and we would sort it out.
Okay.
So on the condition and fulfillment, Michael, we should be able to follow the current approach where the payment manager aggregates all those set of let's say for the codes, it will aggregate all the packet and whatever is needed into an array of individual codes, and then the bulk codes request as it is currently supports that. So that should work like that. And coming to the fulfillment in the put transfers, I posted a link there. We need to copy the entire link, but it shows the data model where we have, again, individual transfer results. So the payment manager just needs to aggregate all those from the core banking solution, if that is what is generating the fulfillments. But if the payment manager itself generates it, it is even easier to collect those and send it across.
And Sam, is there an expectation that the batches, when presented, will include a response with complete line-by-line results for each of those presented? or is
Yes.
it that we'll get answers in piecemeal?
Yeah, Paul, I think answered that. Miller, yes. So we want to, I think at this stage, we are saying that they should include all the individual transfer results in that array. They should respond one way or the other to all of those.
So if I get,
go ahead, please.
So if I break my payment on CARE and I break my payment up into 1,000-unit batches for individual DFSPs, even though I might have 25, 35,000 people with a given DFSP, I might break it up into 1,000-unit batches and send that. I would propose to make that payment to the switch. Switch would route it. The other side would receive it. The single DFSP for which those 1,000 were directed would process that and find that 750 of those are good to go. Each one would have a fulfillment in its response. The other 250 are not good to go for some reason or another, and they would have to provide back the reasons for those. But the batch response can't be sent back until all of the information is known in a constant state for all of those payments. They're either accepted or rejected. So there's implications, I would think, around timing of that. But otherwise, it sounds like the switch would simply be able to handle those as individual payments. There'd be an individual, I'd say individual transfers, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Have I summarized that correctly?
Correct, Miller. At the lowest level, we are dealing with all the individual transfers in a bulk as individual transfers itself. In fact, we have handlers on top of individual transfer mechanism, which break down at the beginning and aggregate at the end. So that is correct. But as you rightly said, if, for example, there are 250 transfers in a batch that a payee DFSP cannot respond to in time, it has to formulate something like an error code for that, 3205 or something, and send that these are timed out. And the switch will respect the rest of the 750 and commit them.
So it could come back. It could come back 100 milliseconds later with the full batch response where 250 of them were marked as timed out, even though it essentially had 15 seconds more to go on the time. I just say I'm not going to deal with these. And it will use an error code that indicates no further processing will continue on these, but give presumably enough error context that that they know whether this is a permanent failure and they shouldn't try to resubmit, or is it something that might be resolvable by the campaign manager in some way. So that'd be similar to what you would see in a non-financial API request to a server. I'm busy now, ask me later, versus it's no point in asking me because you're not credentialed to do this, or I can't handle that because I don't know what you're asking me to do. It's a permanent failure. That would require then, of course, a human being to step in at the source end, the campaign manager. So there has to be enough information that flows back in the batch that the campaign manager, which is not a deliverable module.
No, it's not. No.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that is correct. At the data model level in the individual transfers array, we can support both models. So you can support a single object, which has the fulfillment, expiration timestamp, and other details which are needed for commitment. Or that single object can contain error code, error description, and extension list elements, which the switch can use to aggregate that, because we need to respond to the payer FSP as well as to what happened with those 250 for that particular FSP.
Yeah, I mean, presumably the problem there is that a timeout at the recipient end, the payee DFSP end, due to perhaps insufficient capacity to process the number of requests that were received, will only ever be a temporary situation.
True, agree with that, Mike.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow you.
Sorry, I mean, I'm just thinking, sorry, a timeout at the recipient institution, let's say where of 250 requests, 200 are processed correctly, but the other 50 are timed out. It's hard to see.
Temporary. I'm with you. Yeah, that's a temporary.
So, and it's hard to see how a campaign manager could possibly intervene productively in a situation like that.
Oh no, easily they can resubmit them.
They can resubmit as the only option in a
yeah. In fact, they shouldn't
entirely.
do anything else. They can withdraw them if they say, "I don't want to deal with it now." But as if some manual person pushing the return key themselves, they could simply not do that. But the active response, the correct active response, is to resubmit it if they still have money to pay. I guess I'm getting at something else, which is an individual. Let's say 250 of the line items have individuals who have some problem with their receipt account. That is a temporary failure with the receipt account, such as a limit has been exceeded, or they haven't yet been open long enough. They need another day or two to be open before they can receive payments, or some other thing like that, where they're not all the same. They can't be processed together in all the same way, but each one of them represents some form of transient failure. The campaign manager will need to deal with and make a decision about how to proceed. It would seem to me that's where we need to get into coding. That is, there's a hazard here that we try to think of all those cases and try to write them all down as error messages, when what we should do is allow the recipient to code an individual message for the reason it failed, and to allow the campaign manager to extract all of those answers from this bulk response and do whatever they do that they're paid to do, to go figure it out, but us not figure it out for them, in essence.
We absolutely should not be figuring it out for them. This is the campaign manager's problem. This is what they do day to day.
Even in the payment manager, though, is what I meant. It's like the payment manager goo that we put together to make it simpler for them to do their job. It's like, well, actually, your job's not simple. So get on with it.
I mean, the environment in which campaign managers operate is likely to be radically influenced by a solution such as this, because salary payments is one case where it tends to work pretty reliably, but campaign managers and within NGOs, it is a different environment, as I know you're aware. So it's not unusual for a payment round to take days, frankly, not a few minutes. And if we're able to move them away from people wandering around with bags of cash handing it out to identified beneficiaries, then we've taken a huge step forward already. The first campaign manager I dealt with, they were looking at payment failures, which meant that you were excluded and you didn't get your next payment until 3 months later, if you were lucky. So this is a radical step forward.
Thank you. And I guess that's what I was after, is that there's enough responsiveness to the system that from an individual line item point of view, they're not burdened by the fact that they're part of a 1,000 payment batch.
Yeah.
Other than, look, it's 1,000 payments. The other thing that then to think about for that is how you ensure that 1,000 payment request that smacks into the receipt beneficiary doesn't disable the person standing in line to buy vegetables, because we want them to be near real time, of course, as a bulk payment, but nobody really knows when the campaign manager hit the pay button. And so there's no direct expectation that they're going to stand there and stare at the screen waiting for those 1,000 to go through. They're going to move on to the next piece of work. So that means we need to throttle those in, right? So where does the throttling happen? Does it happen in the payment manager as the responsibility of a DFSP, or does the throttling happen in the switch where it actually takes that bulk message where it's going to debulk that? Or how's that managed? How are you throttling the load on the switch during a bulk transfer?
Well, my view on this was that a bulk payment of this nature, or frankly any nature, should be viewed as something that is lower priority. You do it when you haven't got other transactions to do, frankly. Because if it takes a couple of days, that's an improvement. So let's not worry too much about that. At least this is the context of campaign manager. It's not what you do with salaries, obviously. But yeah. So overnight batch processing is great. Something like this.
Thank you.
So can I just, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
One of the things that we've looked at previously is the idea that we might want bulk processes to be managed via the PISP interface. Did you consider that?
Well, not in the Myanmar context, because it isn't available as things stand in our deployment in Myanmar.
Well, okay. So RTP in that case.
There's no reason why you could not do that, but we're not doing it in this context. Right. So.
Just to add in there, just because we had that conversation, I think it might come up in the 3PPI team's work that we are working on enabling a G2P style use case over 3 PPI as part of our Apex hackathon. Just kind of watch the space for tomorrow's update. Okay,
cool.
The other thing I guess we'll need to think about, though not now, is that the ISO 20022 version of this works in a rather different way, where you can send a multiple credit payment request, where the creditors are distributed over different DFSPs. So I guess we will need to think about how that would work.
Yeah, there's multiple touch points between 222 and all the various use cases that we will need to consider.
And I'd also throw in the mix, G2P is globally such a big conversation at the moment. So for example, this quarter, we've had conversations even with folk like World Bank and with the team at ITU on GovStack. And that's with our upcoming CBDC hackathon in mind. We're not running the hackathon, we're supporting as a technical partner with some real-time push payment rails to help those thinking about the role of CBDC in G2P payments. That's obviously going to be a bulk story, and there'll be programmability through the use of CBDC, but our story there is, well, what's the role of the existing networks in a market? How would you use a simulated real-time payments network to land the money to people in the accounts where pay me means they want it in their MFI account, their SACCO account, their mobile money account, and they can change it over time. So anyone that's also want to think about the story, please come to the Sandbox presentation tomorrow, where I think Lewis will talk a little bit about what he's working on from 3PPI. He's got a backlog of work that he's thinking about in terms of how do we put that sandbox together for the retail CBDC hackathon that World Bank is sponsoring a problem around this G2P story for us. I think it's a really exciting topic, and there's a lot of work to be done to see where do we need to change the product, which is the core clearing system and the binder context that we've identified, to make this stronger. I'm, via Lewis and the Sandbox team, looking closely at how do we do demos and showcases via developer portal with example code. It has a home so that people can see how we imagine how we might use the core clearing hub like this. And therefore we figure out the feedback loops that get us the changes that we need as well. But you can see why this team is so important to us. Such a big conversation this year has been G2P resilience payments with COVID responses.
Paul, Steve has another question that you posted on Pathable. So I've enabled audio for Steve. Can you ask us here? Steve here. You can unmute and pose a question. If he cannot, then I'll read out. Okay, Steve is here.
Hey, Tim, I don't know if you can hear me, but I lost my audio.
Go ahead, we can hear you now. Okay, so Steve's question is, managing when beneficiaries receive their funding is important. If one household gets their funding a few hours before the neighbor, it causes communications challenges. I guess more than a question, I think it's a discussion point, but yeah.
It's quite true.
It's a really important one. And we've actually been talking about it in the reference architecture workstream. So I think that's where everything comes together at some points going, why do we want scheduling? Because of things like this. That's why we have this modular extension.
Yeah, but that's one of the reasons why you do this kind of thing overnight, so everyone has it the next day. But it can't be guaranteed. And I've worked in, and I know that Steve is very experienced in this space, but I've worked in scenarios where people just are getting their payments over a 2-3 day period. In particular, I'm thinking of a particular deployment in northern Nigeria, working with I think it was Mercy Corps. It was 2 or 3 day period for people getting payments. So
presumably those things are distributed in different ways. I mean, sorry, when I say distributed in different ways, I mean that, you know, in the old style cash disbursement sort of situation, the chances are that people who are going to be talking to each other will be paid roughly at the same time. But when there's electronic stuff involved, as we know, it's possible for people to get paid at quite different times because it happens that they use different MFIs. And of course, they don't understand that. No reason why they should.
And actually, there was 2 papers recently from Zambia and Kenya from FSD, Financial Sector Deepening, research that they did on G2P programs and customers needing choice and customers needing clarity on when money will arrive, all those kind of things. Another element on it is liquidity issues. If you send lots of electronic funds into a country and the only thing they're doing with it is cashing out, you've got to think about what that does to your agent network.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
And all of these things are being studied by amazing institutes that we need to support with really good demonstrators, tools, use cases, and stories around choice and scheduling and what a clearing hub should be able to supply to those solutions. There
are external organizations that we should be talking to on this. People like CALP, the Cash Learning Program Partnership. They have a wealth of experience of this type of social payments from, I think it's run by people from Mercy Corps. I've worked with them, with CALP multiple times. They are so knowledgeable. And I would definitely encourage engagement with them.
But let's get some demos of what we have.
Yeah.
Because when you're working with less technical people who work in the field, demos bring things alive. And as a consequence, the conversations get richer and better and stronger very quickly. So this is my call to the community is let's support the sandbox strategy and get some workable demos up and running.
Yep. Quite. Completely agree. I think that we are about out of time now, or coming up to out of time.
Yes, well, 4 minutes to go if you want to give your final thoughts, Paul and Sam.
I think we've covered our final thoughts in the discussion, so I think that's great, Simeon. Thank you.
Awesome.
Unless you want to add anything, Sam.
Thanks, Paul, Simeon. I think we are looking forward to this solution, Paul, and we'll continue to work on roadmap for easing the burden of doing lookups in a loop. Thank you.
Actually, there's a lot of change on the lookup side over in the sandbox strategy too. So let's also figure out how do we remove silos, because we've got a lot of work streams and a lot of teams all thinking about similar things. So my call is also that we start to really collaborate around product council and getting those mission boards clear, what people are doing and why they're doing it and how those things interact and interdepend on each other, because that's how we'll push forward the product together.
Excellent.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. With the last 3 minutes, I just want to remind everybody about the end of day open discussions. This happened from 4 p.m. UTC to 4:30 p.m. UTC. If you go to the Mojaloop website and you'll see a tab, the convening website, and you'll see a tab at the top, daily open discussions. You will be able to see suggestions of topics. Right now we have 3 topics, 2 for today and 1 for tomorrow. Today's topics are a discussion about how to use the reference architecture to align current development with V2 development. There is a second proposal, technical updates from Visa or MMD teams about how they made Mojaloop work for them. And then how do we align business process work on V1 to deliver the designs coming out of the reference architecture, this upcoming PI, in a way that it naturally migrates to V2 by design from the outset. So if you're interested in any of the sessions, please just go ahead and give a thumbs up so we know if you're interested in, so we can gauge the interest in each of the sessions. One of the things that what we will do is at the end of the final session that starts in about 12 minutes, we will open out a breakout discussion room where you're able to join any of these conversations for half an hour and just have some interactive discussion on some of the presentations that you've heard today. So with that, we'll bring this session to a close. The next session is Merchant Scheme Extension being led by Paul Macon. So we will see you there at the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody.